Hello and welcome to the DIsruptAbility podcast presented by Inclusive Cork. Today's interview is with Graham OShea. Graham is an Irish Sign Language teacher and deaf awareness trainer. He is also an advocate and an activist for the deaf community. In today's interview, Graham will describe to us some of the issues that are facing and the barriers that are facing the deaf community in terms of employment. Thank you for listening. Hi, I am absolutely delighted to welcome Graham OShea, who's a former student of mine from the College of Commerce.
Yes.
Was it about 2 years ago, Graham?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And you were doing psychosocial awareness, and I think the subject I was teaching you was disability awareness.
That's right.
Which is kind of funny, really, that I was teaching you and you knew more than me. But I think the students benefited from both of us in the classroom, because me being vision impaired and you being deaf, the students really got an insight and we had some brilliant conversations in the classroom.
Yeah. It was great. I mean, really, your perspective was much broader in terms of disability than mine. So it was very interesting. It was a great learning experience for me. I learned a lot. I would know obviously an awful lot about the deaf community, but to get a hearing perspective, that's something I wouldn't have known anything about.
Well,
so, and I suppose the aim then to educate the other students, for them to build up a very broad awareness of all disability issues.
Mm-hmm. Well, I learned an awful lot from you as well regarding the deaf community.
Of course.
And I know that they are probably one of the most marginalised communities in Irish society today.
Yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose in Ireland we're marginalised in terms of employment.
Mm-hmm.
There are huge barriers to employment, but things are slowly, I suppose, getting better in terms of social inclusion. Mm-hmm. So with the passing of the ICL Act and the recognition of ICL back at the end of 2017, that was the 24th of December that President Higgins signed the Act into law. It was a really nice Christmas present for the deaf community. The legislation was approved on the 14th of December by the Dáil. But I suppose that has started a very slow process, to have different aspects of the Act implemented. And there definitely is more awareness in hospitals and other organisations. But, yes, there is at the same time a lot of marginalisation, and there's a lot to do in terms of building awareness.
So what exactly does it mean to the deaf community having ISL, Irish Sign Language, recognised as an official language in Ireland?
I suppose it means that people are aware of who we are, that we're there, mm-hmm. that we have a language, that we have a culture, that we are a minority group. There's greater recognition on part of the government and respect towards us. We respect, as a community, we respect spoken Irish and spoken English, and now it's our turn for our language to be respected.
Okay. In terms of employment, what is the situation for the deaf community?
So employment, like, deaf people really don't advance in employment. You have a lot of deaf people working very low level jobs or manual jobs without the opportunities of getting promotion. So there's a huge glass ceiling there that people really reach the limit of very quickly. In terms of job interviews, for example, if you're going to have, if you're there as a deaf candidate for a job interview, it's very common really just to be excluded pretty much straight away, and it's very frustrating and very stressful. Like, even for deaf people who've studied and done degrees, like, afterwards trying to get employment, they face huge barriers, and there are no job opportunities out there for us.
Okay. There was a brilliant documentary recently on RTE called London Calling, and it really highlighted the issue of access immigration. Yeah,
and I'm really grateful to the people who made London Calling, because that had a huge impact, and it certainly galvanised the deaf community in terms of our response to what is there in England, and the fact that we don't have access and we don't have choices here in Ireland. And so as a result, people are leaving Ireland and going to England. People with skills and with studies, in the same way that people with disabilities would have skills and have studies and qualifications, but the government isn't providing anything to us, so people have to leave and go to England. So for me, like if I'm going to, let's say, go into an employment situation, who's going to pay for an interpreter? You know, whether it's meetings, pay maybe the interview first, but you know, for maybe proofreading or any aspects of the job, the government should be providing support for that. And if they were providing support for that, then you would find that people would do much better in work. But the difficulty is that that's not happening, and so as a result, people's health is being affected. People are leaving to go to London and they're getting opportunities there. There was one man on the programme named Tom Loy, and he has a really high paid job. He's the chief financial officer in part of London, and he has interpreters with him for every meeting. So they showed in the programme that he was in a meeting, there was 2 interpreters there, and the meeting was able to run as per normal because that support was provided. And he was able to get promotion, to advance in his job with that support. If he didn't have that support, it's hard to know if he would have been able to advance in the way he has. It's, you know, and it's not always about interpreters. It might be about loop systems or about, you know, electronic note-taking systems where people can follow conversation through written English. So, you know, in the same way that people with disabilities should have access, you know, let's say somebody who has a physical disability might affect their hands or whatever, and they have the skills, they have the talent, but, you know, the technology is there, so there should be no excuse. So we should have those same opportunities as well. I know at the moment there's a scheme in England called the Access to Work scheme, and there's a campaign here in Ireland which is being spearheaded by a woman by the name of Joanne Chester, and there's another deaf man as well, Ronan Lowry, who's involved in that campaign. And so they have met the Minister recently, Regina Doherty, to discuss that. So that's a campaign that's ongoing and will continue on, you know, into the future to try and have a similar scheme set up here.
Okay, that's really interesting. What was interesting about Tom Malloy's story as well is I think he went over to the UK at around the age of 12 to go to a deaf boarding school because his parents felt that the education he was getting here was inferior to what would be offered in the UK. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Because, you know, the education here can be very bad, can be very poor. You know, there's a long history of kind of behind deaf education. Let's say from my own schooling would have been through the oral system, so you would have had to learn how to lip read. There would be no sign language, and that was really, really difficult. Now kids are allowed sign, but one of the difficulty is that you have teachers who aren't fluent in sign language, who may have, you know, not great sign language skills, and they're trying to teach through sign language. So as a result, then what you would find is, in general, the kids coming through the school system have poor literacy. So, you know, they may have literacy, you know, at the level of an 8-year-old, and so these kind of problems are ongoing and continuing problems in the deaf community.
Well, and that's a problem then for further education, for third level education, and for successful employment as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we mentioned, the work side of things, but also in terms of third level education, there is funding, there is services. So let's say if somebody's going to go to UCC, there are services that are funded. So I studied a master's myself in history in UCC, in deaf history, about the history of the deaf community in Cork. So I had interpreters for courses, but also for proofreading, and that was funded by UCC. Now, if I hadn't had that, I wouldn't have been able to do my master's. Do you know what I mean? There's no question of that. In terms of work, really there has been, you know, there's nothing like the only job interview, the only grant available is through Intrio. There is a grant available for job interview and for 3 hours training. But for any business who, you know, is taking on deaf people in work, then there's really no other supports available to them after that.
Okay. What about your own employment history, Graham?
So at the moment, well, I studied in Bristol University. I studied in 1998. So that's 21 years ago now. I'm an old man now. And so I studied for 3 years. I did a BA in Deaf Studies, and I taught ISL to kids, adults, etc. But one difficulty is I would love to work in a deaf school, but I face huge barriers in relation to doing that. So they don't have the resources or whatever. So I do teach kids on the ICL home tuition scheme, and I teach adults as well, but it's not full time. It's just part time work. It's freelance, you know. So you're traveling around to different jobs. I do deaf awareness training as well, but that's not something that has really taken off. You get, work from time to time, but not regularly. There are more people who are interested in learning sign language, so it's kind of a slow process, really building up the work.
And where does one train to become an interpreter or an ISL teacher?
So at the moment, the training is to be an interpreter, and I suppose for myself, first of all, I studied at Bristol, so I trained to be an ICL teacher. The interpreters are training to become interpreters, obviously, and then that course was dissolved, and it was eventually in 2001 the Centre for Deaf Studies, around 2001-2002, was set up in Trinity College, and again that was that has become a 4-year degree programme for teachers and for ISL interpreters as well. So there is a 4-year degree programme as well in terms of general deaf studies as part of that Trinity College Centre for Deaf Studies.
You'd imagine that now that it's an official language that there's a lot more demand for those places.
Oh, that's a good question. I have never asked. I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe yes. I don't know. Maybe yes. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah. I can't answer that question. But I do know that after recognition, more people have certainly gone to learn ISL in terms of evening classes or in schools, or there definitely has been transition year. Yeah. There's definitely been increased demand there. But I don't know if that is the same in CDS. I'm sorry, I don't know. There should be, in theory, there should be. So maybe somebody can correct me on whether there is or not. I don't know.
Well, I definitely think there's an interest in the community regarding learning the language. For sure. Yeah.
There is, and there's definitely more demand than before, and I think that is because of ISL recognition. I think if there was no recognition, I think that would be a much slower process. So definitely you can see that things are changing. There is more awareness in terms of more accessibility for hospitals and for healthcare. Education, I think, is still not great, to be honest. Now, there is good news in the sense that St. Patrick's College, DCU, so St. Pat's under DCU has finally set up a course, a university course that's starting in September for a 4-year degree programme for deaf people to become teachers at primary school level. Okay. So that's for the first time, and that's taken a long time for that to happen. But I feel now for myself, I'm too old to do that now. I feel that door has closed, so it's up to the younger people to take that opportunity. But I wish that opportunity had been there 20 years ago. I think that would have made a huge difference, and it would also have made a huge difference for the kids that have come through the primary school system in the meantime.
I know, and I suppose, Graham, it wasn't there 20 years ago, but we have it now. And so for young people who are listening or watching this on YouTube, it's there, it's available. Do the courses, because we need the teachers at primary school level. We need the awareness, we need the education to ensure social inclusion from an early age,
I agree, absolutely. But what's most important is that all of the teachers have fluency in ISL. It shouldn't be a case of, you've done your 10-week course and you can sign a little bit and very slowly. It should be that somebody is absolutely fluent in the same way that somebody's fluent, going in to do the course. They're fluent in English or they might be fluent in Irish. Fluency is very important, and I think that was one of the frustrations that all kids have had through the deaf education system, where teachers are learning or don't have sign language, where they're maybe going to do an evening course and then coming in and sort of trying to use the little bit of sign language they have. Like for deaf students, the deaf students who are starting in September, they will already be fluent sign language users, and that's really, really important for the deaf kids that they're going to be teaching.
No, I agree 100% with that. Okay. On Twitter, I often see something called, and you follow it, I follow you, and hiding ISL. Can you talk to us about that?
So really, in terms of Stop Hiding ISL, that was as a result of the attitude of RTE to not putting sign language on screen. So they refused to put sign language on screen. It was to get the national anthem signed and shown on screen. So for people of the deaf community, that was really frustrating. It was at the finals. Just to go back. So RTE said kind of they would, and then on the day before the match, they said, oh no, they wouldn't show it on screen. So they just showed a few seconds of the national anthem in ISL, and that really caused outrage amongst the deaf community. So in the Finnish, TG Cahir showed it, and there was no problem. Nobody complained. Nothing happened. But the real issue, I suppose, was RTE's attitude to sign language. That they were the majority, and that the minority needed to be shoved in the corner as much as possible, whether that be, it's grand if it's on TG Cahir, we don't mind, or wherever, but that they just didn't want to show it on the majority channel. So, and the deaf community wanted it to be shown on RTE, And there was huge outrage in May in the elections for the European elections.
Mm-hmm.
So there was so the first announcement of the results, there was an interpreter there, and basically RTE cut off. You could see part of the interpreter's arm moving, but that was about it. And I have to say, Micheál Kelleher, who was involved in the elections himself, he took a photo of the broadcast and he sent it out on Twitter. And I know for that moment was a huge moment for me of my own kind of frustration. And I showed it to a member of staff in RTE, and I said, why are you excluding the interpreter? And I showed it also to some of the candidates in the European election, and eventually they sort of agreed. There was a discussion, and it was agreed they would show the interpreter the whole time. But we pay our TV licence the same as everybody else. I'm paying my TV licence, and I'm not getting the same level of service or access as everybody else. So that was the same kind of message as Stop Hiding ISL. Why am I paying my TV licence if we're not being shown, or ISL isn't being shown on television?
Okay, well done to you and Micheál for highlighting that. And I'm just going to mention you did run in the Cork local elections, as did Micheál Kelleher, as a deaf person, ran in the Dublin local elections. Neither of you won, but you certainly highlighted the issues for the deaf community. Isn't that right, Graham?
That's right. It was a very interesting experience for me and for Micheál Kelleher as well. There were lots of barriers, one of the big ones being interpreters. I can't depend on interpreters to come around canvassing with me or to go to hustings with me on a pro bono, on a voluntary basis. So I kind of felt like a bit stuck in terms of not being able to use that service. So I leave it to the canvass in that sense. But I would think it was the same, for people who have physical disabilities as well, who may need support to get involved in local elections. So that's something that I have brought up with TDs and councillors about the barriers to people becoming involved in politics, and that there should be funding. There should be a funding there for people to become involved in politics, whether it's having interpreters, or hustings, or canvassing, whatever. And that's something that a lot of the politicians weren't aware of, and I hope that's something, and their plans to bring that further.
Okay. Do you think, were you the first deaf candidate in Cork?
Oh yeah. Well, the first ICL user anyway. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Breaking down, busting through that concrete ceiling. I don't even call it the glass ceiling anymore. I call it the concrete ceiling.
Yes. But then, once you bust through it, then sometimes the problem is where are the services that you need. So it's difficult. It was hard. It was a difficult enough experience. I mean, they provided interpreters at the county council for different parts of the election process, but for the canvassing it was just impossible. So that made me angry, really, to see. So let's say, for example, if you were talking about the county council, there's always hustings and for example, for other candidates, whether especially in local elections for TDs, but there are no interpreters at that. So for people who, for deaf people who are looking to vote for different candidates, they should have the opportunity to go and see what the TDs are saying, what ideas they're presenting. Let's say it's the Green Party or whatever party, if they have something on, Like, who's going to pay for the interpreter? I might want to go and see what different parties have to say, but who's going to pay for the interpreter? And there isn't access in the same way to the political system in the same way that there is for hearing people who just get to sort of see what's on and choose to what they want to go to. So that's really has been a learning experience for me. And I think one of the issues is there isn't people don't have access to enough information, and that would be through interpreters, but the access just isn't there.
Would the parties not take the responsibility and pay for that? I mean, they get funding for elections and you're the voters.
Yeah, they should. But you get tired of asking all the time. You get tired of reminding them, and they're like, oh, we never thought. But you're doing the job of educating them on a constant basis. So, I think once people could see, and that goes for people with disabilities as well, once people could see that they were deaf and candidates with disabilities, then that made them think a little bit more by us being involved. But quite often they just don't think about things, and you're always constantly reminding them, and you're always kind of saying, oh, we're here, can you do that? And for big organisations like Fianna Fáil or whatever, they might say, oh, we just never thought, or whoever just never thought. And that's very frustrating to be constantly having to do that type of, asking.
You're damn right, it is frustrating. And I mean, they never thought. Well, they can start thinking now, because they've heard it from Graham OShea on the DIsruptAbility podcast. Start thinking about all your voters. ISL is an official language in Ireland, and political parties, all of you, I'm not going to name anyone in particular, because all of you are responsible to ensure that all the voters get the information that they are entitled to.
Yeah, I agree. There's one thing that, let's say if I meet members of a particular party, for example, deaf people have the right to go and meet our representatives individually, and we shouldn't have to meet them as the group. Do you know what I mean? I should have the right to go and meet my local politician in my local area, whether that's West Cork, for example, or wherever. It's quite often they'll say, oh, can you not, can I not meet the group? I don't want, us to have to go as a group. I want us to be able to meet you on an individual basis like everybody else. And I have seen people's attitude towards us in that sense, that that they're trying to avoid spending money. They're trying to minimize the amount of money they spend, and that's something over the last while that I found very frustrating, because I see that these are politicians and political parties who have plenty of money, and this is the attitudes they're taking, and to be honest, it kind of would make you angry.
Yeah, that's a very interesting concept, because I always say none of us are one-dimensional. The disability or being deaf is only one part of who you are. There's many other issues that will make you vote for a party, or just what you believe in doesn't mean that it's what everyone else in the deaf community believes in. Just because I'm a woman doesn't mean that I agree with every other woman who has something to say. So we're not one-dimensional. Our disability is one part of who we are, but it's not the only thing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we're very varied. We're very, multi-dimensional. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
How can technology change this in terms of education and employment? And what I mean is, for interpreters, is there a service, I forget the name of it, a service that you can have an interpreter online?
So I suppose there's two services. There's like face-to-face interpreting for maybe conferences or for meetings, and there is another service which is called Iris, which is a remote interpreting service, which is on screen, so the interpreter is based somewhere else, and as a deaf person might be in the country like Kerry or Cork, and so you can use that. It's a very good service, but you have to book it in advance. It's quite limited.
Okay.
And it would not be recommended for meetings, for example, at all.
Okay.
Sometimes the signal can freeze, the signal can break,
Okay.
and it's, if you were talking about trying to run through, let's say, a meeting of an hour, that could be an unfair situation for both the interpreter and the deaf person. So in those kind of situations, it's better to bring somebody in face to face. So some people think that that's going to be the answer to everything. But let's say if you're talking about a hospital situation, it wouldn't be appropriate. It would be better to bring in an interpreter. Because also sometimes, people are in vulnerable situations, or maybe there are vulnerable people, and so, it's very important that the interpreter gets an opportunity to come in and work face to face, so they can see the kind of dynamics that they're being faced with, Let's say, for example, I won't name the organisation, but I was at a meeting recently where they used Iris, and I was kind of watching things as it progressed or whatever. And at the start it seemed to be working okay, but then for the second meeting it wasn't great. The signal was freezing a lot, and so I said nothing, because I felt there was no point in kind of explaining this to them. And then on the third day, you could see that it just kept freezing and it wasn't working at all. And then I was kind of saying, well, that's proof that there are times when you need a face-to-face interpreter. And again, like, the reason they didn't want to is because Iris is cheaper, and they wanted to use a cheaper service rather than bring in a face-to-face. But I have a right to have an interpreter on site, for meetings like that. So let's say if you were doing an interview for the podcast today through Iris, it would be impossible. It wouldn't be, and you just give up. You just give up. It just wouldn't work. It just wouldn't be impossible. Even after an hour, it would just be impossible. Like, if it's a very short kind of light interaction, just to arrange a couple of details, that's fine. But for very detailed information, it just isn't suitable.
Okay. Are there barriers in the banking system in terms of interpreters being a third party and therefore not being recognised?
Yeah. So some organisations have good attitude or have a good approach, and some don't. So really GDPR has had a huge negative effect. Before GDPR, things were fine really in banks and other organisations, like for signing documents or whatever. But now with GDPR, they want for contracts, let's say they want you to sign a contract to say they want you to sign in advance, basically, that allowing the use of Iris. So some are fine, but some are not. So let's say, for example, my insurance company, there's no problem. I didn't have to sign anything. I've just been able to ring my insurance company and discuss things without any difficulties. But I tried with AIR, and I just faced barrier after barrier for about 6 months. I was trying to work with AIR, but in the finished, I just cut off my contract with AIR. And now, as a result, AIR have become more aware than they were before, and they're going to bring in other sort of security measures in terms of how they can deal with third parties. But it's a very slow process for all of those kind of changes to happen. And in the meantime, it has been a very frustrating experience trying to deal with the GDPR. I think a lot of organisations were just like completely in a panic after the GDPR, and you're trying to say no, you still have the same rights, but they're like no, we can't because of GDPR, and this was given as an excuse all the time, and it has had a huge effect. I would assume that it's the same for many people with disabilities as well, that it's been frustrating in terms of the effect that it's had. Like GDPR, like they have said that under GDPR there isn't any restrictions in terms of interpreting, but big companies, the problem is with big companies who have taken a different view.
Yeah, but this is where the big companies need to be more aware again of all their consumers and all their consumers' needs. So we're highlighting that today. And Graham, thank you so much for highlighting so many different areas in education, in employment, in business, as a consumer, as a voter. Everything that we've talked about today, I think, has been really enlightening. And I'm delighted you came in.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Please be advised that this recording does not constitute medical or legal advice.